The National Do Not Call Registry is intended to give U.S. consumers an opportunity to limit the telemarketing calls they receive. To register by telephone, consumers may call 1-888-382-1222. Or they may register via the web at the DoNotCall.gov registration page. The registry was set to begin in 2003, but a court challenge delayed its implementation until 2004. The law provides exceptions to a blanket do not call ruling. Separate laws and regulations apply to robocalls in the United States. Implementation Act. On June 27, 2003, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission opened the National Do Not Call Registry in order to comply with the Do Not Call Implementation Act of 2003, sponsored by Representatives Billy Tauzin and John Dingell and signed into law by President George W. Bush on March 11, 2003. The law established the FTC's National Do Not Call Registry in order to facilitate compliance with the Telephone Consumer Protection Act of 1991. Registration for the Do Not Call list began on June 27, 2003, and enforcement started on October 1, 2003. Since January 1, 2005, telemarketers covered by the registry have up to 31 days from the date a number is registered to cease calling that number. Originally, phone numbers remained on the registry for a period of 5 years, but are now permanent because of the Do Not Call Improvement Act of 2007, effective February 2008. Wireless phone numbers need not be included on the registry to avoid most unsolicited calls. However, a consumer may add a wireless phone number to the list if he/she wishes to. FCC regulations prohibit telemarketers from calling a cellular phone number with an automatic dialer under all circumstances. In 2005, a rumor began circulating via email that cell phone providers were planning on making their number directories available to telemarketers. The FTC responded by clarifying that cell phones cannot be called by telemarketers. Similarly, fax numbers do not need to be included in the registry due to existing federal laws and regulations that prohibit the sending of unsolicited faxes. If a person does not want to register a number on the National Registry, he or she can still prohibit individual telemarketers from calling by asking the caller to put the called number on the Compania Unregistered Trademark S Do Not Call list. Legal challenges. The Do Not Call list was slated to take effect on October 1, 2003, but 2 federal district court decisions almost delayed it. One from Oklahoma was overcome by special legislation giving the FTC specific jurisdiction over the matter. The other from Colorado revolved around questions of regulation of commercial speech and threatened to delay implementation of the list. However, President Bush signed a bill authorizing the no-call list to go ahead in September 2003. Finally, the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit on February 17, 2004, upheld the constitutionality of the law. Exceptions to the Do Not Call rule. Known exceptions placing one's number on the National Do Not Call Registry will stop some, but not all, unsolicited calls. The following are exceptions granted by existing laws and regulations and these types of organizations can register with DoNotCall.gov and can purchase telephone lists from the Do Not Call Registry. The registry only applies to residential lines, not to business lines. A person may still receive calls from political organizations. The organization Citizens for Civil Discourse has lobbied Congress to close this exception by developing a national political Do Not Call registry where voters can register their phone numbers and ask politicians to take the Do Not Contact pledge. Its database is not backed by the force of law, and as of November 2008, only 3 politicians running for office signed the pledge. A person may still receive calls from not-for-profit organizations. A person may still receive calls from those conducting surveys. A person may still receive calls from a company up to 31 days after submitting an application or inquiry to that company, unless the company is specifically asked not to call. A person may still receive calls from bill collectors. These callers are, however, regulated by other laws, such as the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, which limits them to calling during reasonable hours. Some creditors may not call debtors who file for bankruptcy protection. Loopholes. Some attempts have been made by telemarketers to skirt the do not call list rules. An example is the Dove Foundation, which places survey calls and then requests permission for a follow-up call. The follow-up call is conducted by a for-profit company attempting to sell products. This operation resulted in a restraining order in Missouri in March 2006. Enforcement. Complaints concerning telemarketing calls to homes and personal cell phones can be made to the U.S. Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Communications Commission has created rules implementing the National Do Not Call Implementation Act. These rules are codified at the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 47, Section 64.1200. The rules should be consulted in order to determine whether a particular incident violated the rules and can result in enforcement. In order to create an actionable complaint pursuant to FCC rules, an individual with a home phone or a personal cell phone is required to specify details of the infraction to the FCC. Typically this includes facts such as when the call occurred, the phone number called, the calling organization, the goods or services being marketed, whether the caller has any exemption status. Details of these rules can be found on the FCC's complaint form. Many journalists and victims of fraudulent calls and do not call violations have extensively documented ongoing and widespread inaction and lack of enforcement by the FTC. In May 2014, Sprint Corporation was fined a record $7.5 million for failing to honor requests by consumers to opt out of receiving telemarketing calls and texts. The fine followed an investigation that had begun in 2012. We expect companies to respect the privacy of consumers who have opted out of marketing calls, Travis LeBlanc, acting chief of the FCC's Enforcement Bureau said at the time. When a consumer tells a company to stop calling or texting with promotional pitches, that request must be honored. Today's settlement leaves no question that protecting consumer privacy is a top enforcement priority. Do Not Call Improvement Act of 2007. On February 15, 2008, U.S. President George W. Bush signed into law the H.R. Bill 3541, Do Not Call Improvement Act of 2007. Two major changes were enacted through this law. While originally required to renew their phone numbers every 5 years, consumers need now only register once to maintain their phone numbers on the Do Not Call registry. The frequency with which the FTC must purge the registry of disconnected and reassign numbers has also been increased to several times a month. However, the Do Not Call Improvement Act prohibits removing numbers from the Do Not Call registry unless the number is invalid, disconnected, reassigned, or the individual to whom the number is assigned so requests. Results. According to the 2009 Economic Report of the President, prepared by the Council of Economic Advisers, the program has proved quite popular. As of 2007, according to one survey, 72% of Americans had registered on the list, and 77% of those say that it made a large difference in the number of telemarketing calls that they receive. Another survey, conducted less than a year after the Do Not Call list was implemented, found that people who registered for the list saw a reduction in telemarketing calls from an average of 30 calls per month to an average of 6 per month. See also, Do Not Call Register, National Do Not Call List, New Zealand Name Removal Service, Telephone Preference Service, Auto Dialer, Call Screening, Predictive Dialer, a computerized system that automatically dials batches of telephone numbers for connection to agents assigned to sales or other campaigns, Robinson List, an opt-out list of people who do not wish to receive marketing calls, robocall, teleblock, telemarketing. References. National Do Not Call Registry DoNotCall.gov. Do Not Call registrations permanent and fees telemarketers pay to access registry set FTC.gov. AB wireless phones and the National Do Not Call list FCC.gov. The truth about cell phones and the Do Not Call registry FTC.gov. The truth about cell phones and the National Do Not Call registry FTC.gov. Mainstream Marketing Services Incorporated v. Federal Trade Commission, U.S. 10th Circuit Court of Appeals CA10.uskirts.gov. National Do Not Call Registry DoNotCall.gov. Consumer Information FTC.gov. Stop political robocalls and telemarketers with number robostoppoliticalgas.org. Consumer Fact Sheet on FCC Do Not Call Rules, Federal Communications Commission FCC.gov. GAO Report on Implementation of the National Do Not Call Registry DoNotCall.gov. January 2005. The original 2003 rule had a 3-month waiting period, but this was changed effective January 1, 2005. Company selling films use non-profit organization as front to try to circumvent state no-call law, Nixon says, AB filing a complaint, General FCC.gov. National Do Not Call Registry DoNotCall.gov. 47 CFR Section 64.1200, Bill Singer. Consumer outrage with diabetes telemarketer tactics in the Federal Do Not Call Registry. Forbes. Regulator fines Sprint $7.5 million for not screening unwanted calls. United States News.net. Retrieved May 20, 2014. Do Not Call Improvement Act of 2007 inches. GovTrack Us. 2009 Economic Report of the President, Box 9-1 Gail Gubash-whitehouse.archives.gov. External links, 15 U.S. Code Chapter 87A, National Do Not Call Registry, DoNotCall.gov registration page, U.S. Do Not Call lists by state, updated list of states that do and do not have separate no-call lists with links to their online registries. U.S. Do Not Call lists by state, updated list of states no-call lists with links to their online registries. Missouri no-call homepage. Missouri residents may also register their number on the Missouri no-call list. Telecom Commercial Communications Customer Preference Portal of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. Why do we get telemarketing calls even after registering under Do Not Call list?